Welcome to Starbound. My name's the Voice Ogre, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new stories of Sunspire Academy, which I happen to do, and Freyren and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. It wasn't strength, quick thinking, or endurance. Those traits belong to humanity and its direct children, not to him. As Tanir stared at the data slate in his small hands, at the impossible number declaring him 0.01% human, he couldn't understand the commotion it had caused on the local news. He had no idea that this infinitesimal link was about to bestow upon him a crown, and a burden far heavier than he was prepared to bear. The morning sunlight streamed through the fully open windows of his modest apartment, bathing the worn wooden furniture in a warm yellow glow. Tanir sat hunched at his kitchen table, his blue-skinned fingers trembling as they gripped the edges of his data slate. The light hit the subtle texture of his skin. Not quite scales, not quite flesh, but something uniquely zihal, like fine leather dusted with sapphire powder. His short, pointed ears moved involuntarily, a nervous habit he'd developed as a child. He caught his reflection in the darkened screen of his beverage warmer and grimaced. Nothing about him looked human, despite the basic bipedal form they shared. His bald head gleamed like a polished stone, the blue extending seamlessly from face to crown. His eyes, a striking shade of amber that bordered on yellow, blinked rapidly as he processed the information before him. Purple lips, the color of twilight on his homeworld, parted slightly in disbelief. The only feature that had ever given him pause, that had made him wonder about some distant mutation in his genetic line, was his tongue. Unlike every other Zihal he knew, his wasn't pointed like a dagger, but rounded, almost bulbous. It was this peculiarity, this tiny deviation from the norm, that had driven him to take the DNA test in the first place. He'd expected to find some minor mutation, perhaps something inherited from his mother's side of the family, that always been considered a bit odd by Zihal standards. Maybe a genetic hiccup from the generations of living near the old mining colonies where radiation sometimes played tricks with cellular structures. What he hadn't expected was to see his name plastered across every newsfeed in Linar City with a headline, "A human among us? Local sanitation worker tests positive for human DNA." Tanir groaned and rubbed his smooth scalp with both hands. Sanitation worker. They couldn't even dignify him with the proper title of Waste Management Technician 3rd Class. He grabbed his data slate and began frantically searching the planetary network for information about human DNA and other species. Surely this was some kind of mistake. A contamination in the lab, perhaps. Or maybe there had been some ancient genetic experiments he'd never heard about. What he found made him nearly spit out his morning brew. Article after article detailed what the humans apparently called fooling around in space, a human term for what appeared to be humanity's galaxy-wide habit of, integrating with anything that moved. The language barrier couldn't hide the shocking reality. Humans had apparently made it their mission to ensure their genetic legacy touched every corner of the known universe, and they'd done it with disturbing enthusiasm. "The Grande Experiment of 2847, he read aloud, his voice climbing higher with each word, "saw human volunteers partnering with over 40 different species to test genetic compatibility. Results were overwhelmingly successful." His purple lips formed a perfect O of shock. The article went on to describe how human scientists had developed compatibility nanotech serums, genetic bridges, and something called interspecies reproduction agents to ensure that any hybrid offspring could choose their preferred species to reproduce later in life.
"Choose?"
Tanir squeaked, scrolling faster.
"They could choose?"
The numbers were staggering. Conservative estimates suggested humans had directly contributed to the creation of at least 100 new hybrid species across the galaxy. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was the casual nature of it all. Humans hadn't done this in a controlled way. They'd done it because, as one human scientist was quoted saying, "We wanted to help the couples, and we were curious about what would happen." Even supposedly pure species like his own people, the Zihal, occasionally found traces of what articles had delicately termed historical human genetic influence in their genome. The percentage was usually so small as to be negligible, 0.01% or less, but it was there, lurking in the genetic code like a signature on an ancient painting. "By the old moons," Tanir muttered, his fingers quickly moving across the data slate's surface. He had to know. He had to find out how this had happened to him. It took 3 hours of digging through old archives, family records, and dusty corners of the planetary database before he found it. A small news item from 347 years ago, barely a paragraph long. Local healer Zaira Tinoshi provides aid to crash visitor. A human pilot, whose craft experienced engine failure in the Outer Rim, was treated for severe injuries by healer Tinoshi of Lower Linar. The human, who gave his name only as Sam, recovered fully under Tinoshi's care. No further information about the visitor's departure was recorded. No further information about his departure. Tanir read the line 5 times, each reading making the implications clearer. His great-great-great-grandmother hadn't just healed the human. In fact, there was no record of Sam leaving. Combined with Tanir's current genetic revelation, painted a picture that made his blue skin flush purple with embarrassment.
Grandma Tenoshi?
He said to the empty kitchen, his voice a mixture of accusation and bewilderment.
What did you do?
He slumped in his chair, the weight of his identity crisis pressing down on his narrow shoulders. How could she? All she had to do was heal the human, perhaps share a meal or two, exchange pleasant conversation about their respective worlds. Was that so hard? But no. Apparently, Grandma Tenoshi had decided to share more than a pleasant conversation. Now, centuries later, Tanir was paying the price for her excessive hospitality. How would his coworkers look at him now? Would they see him as Tanir, reliable waste management technician, 3rd class, who had never missed a shift and always sorted the recyclables properly? Or would they see him as Tanir the almost human, the genetic anomaly, the living reminder that even the Zahal weren't immune to humanity's peculiar brand of reproductive enthusiasm? He was so lost in his spiral of self-pity and ancestral blame that he almost didn't hear the crash of his front door being blown off its hinges. Almost. The door didn't just open, it exploded inward in a shower of splinters and twisted metal, slamming against the far wall with enough force to leave a sizable dent. Tanir's scream died in his throat as 6 figures stormed into his apartment, and he immediately recognized them as royal guards. They looked like him, blue-skinned, bald, with the same pointed ears. But that's where the similarities ended. Where Tanir wore simple cloth garments suitable for crawling through waste disposal tunnels, these Zihal were wrapped in form-fitting synthetic fibers that seemed to shift and ripple with their movements.
I can explain!
Tanir shrieked, throwing his hands up and nearly dropping his data slate.
The DNA test was just a curiosity. I didn't even know about the human thing. It wasn't my fault. It was my great-great-great-great-grandmother. She was the one who, well, you know.
The guards said nothing, their yellow eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his knees knock together.
I'm a good citizen,
he continued, his voice climbing to near hysteric pitches.
I pay my taxes. I sort my waste into the proper categories. I have never even met a human. I don't like humans. They're too hairy. And they only have the one stomach. How do they even digest properly with just the one stomach?
Still, the guards remained silent, their spears humming with that unsettling light.
Please,
Tanir whimpered, sinking lower in his chair.
I'll take hormone suppressants, gene therapy, whatever you want. I will scrub the human right out of me. I will become the most Zihal who ever Zihaled. Just please don't.
Your Majesty. The words came from the centermost guard, whose uniform bore additional swirls of gold that Tanir hadn't noticed in his panic. The guard dropped to one knee, and the others followed suit in perfect synchronization. The glowing spear tips touched the floor of his kitchen, leaving small scorch marks on the linoleum.
You're what?
Tanir blinked rapidly, certain he'd misheard. Your Majesty, the guard repeated, his voice deep and reverent. By decree of the Zahal crown and the ancient law of succession, You are hereby recognized as the rightful heir to the throne. His eternal luminance, the current king, requests your immediate presence at the palace. We are here to escort you to your destiny."
My destiny? Tanir's voice cracked. My destiny is to clean out the processing plant number 9 this afternoon. I have a schedule.
The guard's purple lips twitched in what might have been amusement. Your Majesty's dedication to duty is admirable. However, greater duties now await. If your Majesty would be so kind as to accompany us. His eternal luminance is quite eager to meet you, and we would hate to keep him waiting. He becomes cranky when he's waiting.
But I...
Also, the guard continued, rising smoothly to his feet, your Majesty might wish to bring a change of clothes. Royal coronations can be quite lengthy affairs, and your Majesty's current attire may not be entirely suitable for receiving the crown of stars, the scepter of souls, and the 3 sacred rings of rulership.
What?
Tanir squeaked. The guard's expression remained professionally neutral. You are royalty, your Majesty. Shall we proceed? Tanir stared at the 6 guards, at their glowing spears, at the ruins of his front door, and then down at his data slate where the accursed 0.01% still glowed mockingly at him. Somewhere in the afterlife, he was certain Grandma Tenoshi was having a good laugh at his expense.
I don't suppose, he said weakly, that we could just pretend that this never happened? I could delete the test results, you could fix my door, and then we could just go back to our lives.
The guard's synchronized headshake was answer enough. With a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, Tanir stood on shaking legs.
Fine. But someone's gonna have to call my supervisor and explain why I'm missing my shift. And I want it all on record that this is Grandma Tenoshi's fault for not keeping things cordial with that Sam fellow.
As the guards formed a protective formation around him and began leading him toward the gaping hole where his door used to be, Tanir couldn't help but notice the crowd gathering outside. His neighbors, the local shopkeepers, even Mrs. Zilanka from 3 floors up who'd never left her apartment. They were all staring at him with expressions of awe and confusion. "Long live the king!" a guard shouted. This was really happening. He, Tanir the waste management technician, Tanir who lived in a 2-room apartment and considered a new mop head the height of luxury, was apparently now royalty. All because of a fraction of a percentage of human DNA that he hadn't even known existed until this morning. As they approached the royal transport hovering outside his building, a gleaming vessel that looked like it was made of crystallized starlight, one thought kept circling through Tanir's mind. What in the old moons had Grandma Tenoshi started? The journey to the palace had taken exactly 1 hour. Though it felt like a lifetime to Tanir, the royal transport had guided them through the city's upper airways, past gleaming spires and dark towers he'd only ever seen from the ground while emptying waste receptacles. He pressed his face against the transparent wall of the transport like a child, watching his familiar world transform into something alien and magnificent from this new perspective. Now he stood before the massive doors of the throne room, his legs trembling like jelly beneath him. The guards had left him here alone, telling him to wait for the doors to open. His reflection stared back at him from the clean surface, small, blue, and utterly out of place in the grandeur of the palace halls. As he watched, the huge doors began to open with a sound like distant thunder, revealing the throne room beyond. No hands pushed them, no mechanisms were visible. They simply parted like curtains made of cosmos, and Tanir had to force himself to step through before his courage failed entirely. His breath caught in his throat. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows, despite the ethereal light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The floor beneath his feet wasn't made of any material he recognized. It felt solid, but looked like walking on captured nebulas. Swirls of color shifting with each step. Pillars of twisted rock rose like frozen waterfalls, each one truly unique in its form. But it was the throne that drew his attention, a massive construct of white stone and metal, its back rising nearly 10 feet into the air. And it was empty. Well, not entirely empty. Perched on the padded seat, looking decidedly out of place, was a crown. Not moving, not floating, not glowing, just sitting there, like someone had forgotten their hat after a particularly long day of work. Tanir's mind raced. Where was the old king? Had something happened? Was he dead? Had there been a coup? Was this some elaborate test where he was supposed to grab the crown and claim power? Or worse, was this all an elaborate prank? He could imagine his coworkers jumping out from behind the pillars, laughing at how gullible he'd been. "You really thought you were gonna be king," they'd say. "Tanir the human trash man thinking he's a royalty." He took a tentative step toward the throne, then another. The crown didn't move. It was simpler than he'd expected. Not the elaborate construction of gems and precious metals he's seen in history texts, but an elegant circlet that seemed to be made of the same strange material as the doors. A theatrical cough echoed through the chamber, making him jump so hard he nearly fell over. His heart hammered against his ribs, and his eyes darted around the vast space, looking for the source. "Well?" a voice called out, elderly, but traveling clearly across the distance. "Are you going to stand there like a fish, or are you going to join me? I promise I'm not bitter about the whole thing. Much." Tanir spun around and finally noticed what he'd missed in his fixation on the throne. A small tea table set up near one of the pillars, looking absurdly domestic in the cosmic grandeur of the room. An elderly Zahal sat there, stirring a cup of something that steamed purple in the ethereal light. He was dressed simply, in robes that might have been grand once, but now looked comfortable and well-worn. An empty chair waited across from him, and on the table between them sat a full-service tea table that looked like it belonged in someone's kitchen rather than a palace. Tanir approached hesitantly, each step feeling like he was walking through thick syrup, his mind overflowing with questions, doubts, and the persistent feeling that at any moment someone would jump out and yell, "Surprise!" The old king, for who else could this be, watched him with an expression of amusement, continuing to stir his tea in slow circles. When he finally reached the table, Tanir stood awkwardly beside the empty chair, unsure of the protocol. Should he bow? Kneel? He'd seen historical dramas where subjects prostrated themselves before royalty, but that seemed excessive. Then again, nothing about this day had been anything less than excessive. "Sit, sit," the old king waved impatiently. "My neck's not what it used to be, and looking up at you is giving me a crick, so yes. And besides, you're blocking my light." Tanir sat, perching on the edge of the chair like he might need to bolt at any moment. Up close, he could see the old king more clearly. The ruler looked ancient, his blue skin having taken on a grayish tinge that spoke of a long life, but his yellow eyes were sharp, intelligent, and currently twinkling with what looked suspiciously like mischief. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. How did one address a king? Former king? Soon-to-be former king? His proper Zahal education hadn't covered this scenario. The old king watched him with those amused yellow eyes, sipping his tea slowly, the silence stretched between them. "You look like you're trying to solve advanced math in your head," the old king finally said. "What's troubling you, boy?" That did it. The floodgates opened.
Troubling me?
Tanir's voice cracked like he was going through puberty again.
Troubling me? I woke up this morning as a waste management technician 3rd class with a weird tongue and a normal life. I had a schedule. I had responsibilities. I had a perfectly good mop that I had finally just broken in right. And then I find out that I'm 0.01% human because my great-great-great-grandmother couldn't keep her hands off some crash pilot named Sam. You have any idea what that feels like? To discover that your whole identity is based on some centuries-old interspecies booty call?
He was standing now, though he didn't remember getting up, gesturing wildly with his hands.
And now I'm here, in the palace, with guards calling me Your Majesty and blowing my door off its hinges. You have any idea how much that's gonna cost to fix? My security deposit's gone. And you're sitting here asking what's troubling me. everything is troubling me. This whole thing has come back to bite me in the ass because Grandma Tenoshi had to go and fraternize with this first smooth-talking human who crash-landed in her backyard.
The old king's laughter cut him off. Not a polite chuckle or a reserved titter, but full-bodied, tears in the eyes, clutching his stomach laughter. He laughed so hard his crown, a simple circlet compared to the monstrosity on the throne, slipped sideways. He laughed until he was wheezing, slapping the table with one blue hand and making the tea service rattle dangerously. He gasped between guffaws. That's rich. Oh, that is absolutely precious. And here I thought I was the only one with a dubious grandparent in the family tree. You should see your face. Centuries-old interspecies booty call. I'm going to have that embroidered on a pillow. Tanir stared, completely lost. What? The king's laughter finally subsided to occasional chuckles. He wiped his eyes with a handkerchief that materialized from somewhere in his robes and straightened his crown. When he looked at Tanir again, his expression had shifted to something more serious, though mirth still was present in his eyes. First lesson of kingship, boy. Never speak ill of your ancestors, especially the ones who gave you your advantages. And you do have advantages, whether you realize it or not. He leaned forward, studying Tanir intently. Tell me, have you ever heard of another Zahal using the expression, bite me in the ass? Tanir flushed purple, the color spreading from his cheeks down his neck. He was aware of his tendency toward colorful language, yes? Dirty words and strange expressions had always seemed to bubble up when he was stressed or in pain. He attributed it to working in waste management. He picked up all sorts of language in the tunnels. The other workers had always found it amusing. The way he'd combine proper Zahal sentence structure with decidedly improper vocabulary. I never really thought... Or booty call, smooth talking. Those aren't Zahal expressions, boy. Haven't you noticed that when you're upset, your language becomes decidedly alien? Now that the king mentioned it, Tanir realized it was true. When he'd stubbed his toe last week, what had come out of his mouth wasn't any Zahal curse, but something that roughly translated to, mother-loving son of a biscuit. His coworkers had been confused, but amused. He'd always assumed he picked it up from somewhere, maybe from old entertainment broadcasts or forgotten literature. Human linguistic patterns, the king said, nodding sagely. Embedded in your brain structure, most likely. Part of your inheritance, along with that tongue you're so embarrassed about. Fascinating how genetics work, doesn't it? A fraction of a percent of DNA, and yet it expresses itself in the most unexpected ways. Can we just... Tanir took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. His hands were shaking, and he clasped them together to still the trembling. Can you please explain why you destroyed my door? Why I'm here? Why any of this is happening? Because, I gotta tell you, from where I'm sitting, this all feels like madness. The old king's expression grew solemn. He set down his teacup with deliberate care, the soft clink of ceramic on ceramic somehow ominous in the vast space. When he straightened his chair, Tanir could suddenly see the ruler he had been. The weight of authority that had nothing to do with crowns or thrones. Gods, he called out, his voice carrying an authority that made Tanir's spine straighten. Leave us. Tanir hadn't even realized that there were still guards in the room. They'd been so still, so perfectly positioned that they'd seemed like part of the architecture. Now they moved as one, their footsteps echoing in perfect synchronization. 6 figures in their shifting, light-catching armor filed toward a side entrance Tanir hadn't noticed before. One by one, they passed through, each turning to bow deeply to both the old king and, disturbingly, to Tanir himself. The last guard pulled the door shut with a soft click that seemed to echo in the vast space like a judge's gavel. They were alone. The old king stood, his movements careful but not frail. There was a deliberateness to how he moved, as if each gesture had been practiced over centuries until it achieved maximum efficiency. He began to pace, his soft shoes making no sound on the nebula floor. After a full circuit around their small table, the king stopped and fixed Tanir with those penetrating yellow eyes. In that gaze, Tanir saw centuries of rule, of difficult decisions, of secrets kept and burdens borne. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what do you know of humanity?" Tanir shifted uncomfortably, trying to gather his thoughts into something coherent.
Well, I learned today about their tendencies, their habit of engaging in questionable behaviors with various species throughout the galaxy, the creation of hybrid offspring through scientific intervention, the casual manner in which they approach the creation of life.
"Stop." The king held up a hand, and Tanir's formal recitation cut off mid-sentence. "You sound like a textbook, and a constipated one at that. That's not how you normally talk, is it?"
I was attempting to be respectful, Your Luminance, to speak in a manner befitting our species, and not some human-inherited—
"Drop it." The king waved a hand dismissively. "Be yourself. Talk the way that feels natural. The future of our species might depend on it."
Tanir blinked.
The future of their species? What did he mean? He thought about his absurd day, about everything that had happened since he opened that damn test result. The carefully formal language felt like wearing a suit 3 sizes too small, uncomfortable and restricting. Finally, he abandoned all pretense.
"Fine. Want to know what I think? I think this is all fucking insane. I think that somebody made a massive mistake. I think that I'm having some kind of breakdown and that any minute I'm gonna wake up in my apartment with the door still intact and my life normal. And I think that you need to stop being mysterious and tell me what's going on here before I lose what is left of my mind."
The king smiled, a genuine expression that had transformed his ancient features. "Better. Much better. Now we can have a real conversation." He returned to his seat and poured himself more tea, the purple steam curling up between them like incense. "What I'm about to tell you isn't common knowledge on our world. In fact, we've worked very hard to keep it that way."
"Keep what hidden?"
"The truth about humanity's power." The king settled back in his chair, his fingers steepled before him. The posture reminded Tanir of his old philosophy teacher, right before she'd dropped some piece of knowledge that would keep him awake for weeks trying to process it. "You see the Galactic Council as this monolithic, all-powerful entity, don't you? The great governing body that keeps order among the stars, that mediates disputes between species, that ensures trade flows and justice prevails."
"Oh, yes. Everyone knows that."
"Everyone knows wrong." The king's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "The council is dying, has been for centuries. Oh, it still meets, still passes resolutions, still pretends to have authority. But is it actual power? Its ability to enforce its will? That's been eroding like sandcastles in the tide. And the cause of its slow demise? Humanity." Tanir felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. That's impossible. The council controls trade routes, military forces, the entire governmental structure of known space." "On paper, yes. But tell me, when was the last time you heard of the council enforcing anything without human mercenaries? When was the last great exploration mission that didn't have human scouts leading the way? When was the last scientific breakthrough that didn't have human researchers at its heart?"
"But that's just... They're one species among many..."
"They're everywhere," the king continued, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. "Not through conquest, not through war, but through something far more insidious and far more permanent. They spread through friendship, through curiosity, through that damnable tendency of theirs to mate with anything that moves." your grandmother Tenoshi. She wasn't an aberration. She was part of a pattern that's been repeating for 1,000 years. The king stood again, moving to one of the crystal pillars. He placed a hand on its surface, and images began to flow through the crystal. Star maps, population charts, genealogical trees that branched and interconnected in dizzying complexity. "Look," he said, gesturing for Tanir to join him. "Every point of light is a world with documented human genetic integration. Not colonies, not conquered territories, just places where humans left descendants." The map was overwhelming. Thousands of points of light, scattered across the galaxy like seeds thrown by a cosmic gardener. And from each point, thin lines spread outward, connecting to other points, creating a web that encompassed known space. "Are you saying that they conquered the galaxy by loving their way to dominance?" Crude, but essentially accurate. The king laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, they'll sign treaties and make alliances on paper, certainly, but those fade. Governments change, borders shift. But blood is forever. Every hybrid child, every trace of human DNA scattered across the galaxy. It's all just part of an alliance that could never be broken." "But why? But what's the point?" "That's the beautiful, terrifying thing. I don't think there was a point. Not at first. Humans are just like that. They see something different, and their first impulse isn't to conquer or destroy, but to understand. And apparently their favorite method of understanding involves crossing one line and another until..." Tanir thought about the articles he'd read, about the 100 new species, about the casual way humans had approached genetic integration. Now he wondered if it had been the whole truth, or if even the humans themselves understood what they'd done. Earth and her children, all of those human relatives born on different worlds. They form an alliance that no external force can break, the king continued. They are bound by blood. And the council needs them, for muscle, for minds, for the sheer variety of life they bring. But humanity doesn't need the council at all. They never have. "But why hasn't anyone told you?" "Told our people." The king's smile was sad. "Because knowledge is dangerous. Because hope is necessary. Because sometimes it is better to believe in the comforting lie than the uncomfortable truth. If our people knew that the great Galactic Council was essentially a meaningless organization, what would happen to order, to stability, to the belief that law and justice matter?" "So you've been lying to everyone?" "I've been maintaining necessary fictions. There is a difference." Tanir turned away from the stone pillar and its overwhelming display. He walked back to the tea table on unsteady legs and collapsed into his chair. The weight of what he'd learned pressed down on him like atmospheric pressure. Everything he believed about the structure of the galactic civilization was wrong. "But I still don't understand," he said finally. "What does this have to do with me? With my small fraction of a percent of human DNA?" The king returned to his seat, pouring tea for both of them this time. Tanir accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping his hands around its warmth. "Think about it," the king said. "What I've just told you about humanity's true power, about their network of blood alliances, it's not just history, it's ongoing, it's accelerating. And those of us without human heritage are increasingly finding ourselves outside looking in." Understanding began to dawn. "Oh, we need to find someone who can deal with them, someone that they'll recognize as family." Distant family, but family nonetheless. Under human law, and they do love their laws when it suits them. All children of human descent have certain rights. Rights of passage through human space. Rights of trade with human companies. Rights of appeal to human courts. Rights that purebloods like myself could never claim.
So you want me to be some kind of ambassador?
I want you to be king, the old monarch corrected. A king who happens to have the keys to doors I could never open. Do you want to know what happened the last time I tried to arrange a formal meeting with Earth's government? They kept me waiting for 3 years. But you could walk up to their immigration desk tomorrow and claim citizenship.
Tanir's mind reeled at the implications. He imagined himself approaching Earth, that legendary blue marble that had somehow birthed a species that conquered through love rather than war. The thought terrified him. You think that my human DNA makes me some sort of super leader? He said slowly. You think that I'll be stronger, smarter, or more adaptable? Maybe you even think that I'll go around the galaxy making my own blood alliances to strengthen our position. The king studied him carefully.
Is that what you think I expect?
I don't know what you expect,
Tanir exploded again.
but I can tell you right now I am not strong. I clean waste tunnels for a living. I'm not particularly clever. It took me 27 years to wonder why my tongue was different. And I'm certainly not planning to seduce my way across the galaxy in the name of political stability. I don't even know how to talk to members of my own species half the time, let alone aliens.
Good, the king said simply.
Good?
I don't expect any of that from you. The king leaned forward, eyes intense. Physical strength? We have warriors for that. Intelligence? We have scholars and scientists. Seduction? Please, the last thing we need is more genetic complications. What I need from you is something much simpler and much more difficult. Which is, I need you to be a bridge. To be someone who can stand with one foot in each world and not fall over. Your human heritage isn't about making you super anything. It's about making you comprehensible to them. That dirty mouth of yours that embarrasses you so much. It'll make you relatable to humans in a way that I could never be. That rounded tongue. It'll pronounce their words correctly, form their sounds naturally. You'll understand their jokes and their references, their bizarre way of looking at the universe.
But I don't understand any of that. I have never met or seen a human.
No, but you've got their patterns embedded in your brain. Trust me, it'll come much more naturally than you think. The king smiled. Tell me, when you're working in the tunnels and something goes wrong, what do you do?
Tanir frowned at the apparent non sequitur. I fix it? Find a workaround? Make do with what I have?
Exactly. A proper Zihal would file a report, wait for authorization, follow the multi-step process for tunnel maintenance. You just fix things. Or break them. That's what humans do.
The old king rose from his chair one more time, moving toward the throne. He climbed the steps slowly, each one seeming to take more effort than the last. When he reached the top, he picked up the crown, that simple circlet that held so much weight, and turned back to Tanir.
2,000 years, he said,
his voice echoing in the vast chamber.
That is how long the Zihal have maintained our independence and our neutrality.
He descended the steps, crown in hand.
But that time is ending. The galaxy is choosing sides, whether we admit it or not. Human space grows every year. The council weakens with every generation. Soon, there will be no neutral ground left. We need to choose our place in this new order. And we need someone who can navigate both worlds to do it.
He stopped in front of Tanir, holding out the crown.
I'm not asking you to be a great king. I'm not asking you to be a human king. I'm asking you to be a Zihal king who happens to have the tools that we need to survive. Can you do that?
Tanir looked at the crown, at the old king's expectant face, at the vast throne room that would soon be his responsibility. He thought about his quiet life, his simple job, his comfortable routine. He thought about Grandma Tenoshi and her human pilot, about choices made centuries ago that echoed through time. He thought about his coworkers, his neighbors, all the ordinary Zahal going about their lives, unaware that their government was built on necessary fictions and their future hung on genetic dice thrown centuries ago. "I don't want this," he said quietly. "I want you to know that. Being king, making decisions for millions, playing political games with the fate of our species, it's not a prize for me. It's a burden. Maybe even a curse."
"I know," the old king said gently.
"I'll probably be terrible at it."
"Possibly."
"I'll definitely embarrass us with my language."
"I believe you."
"And I have no idea how to talk to humans without offending them."
"You'll learn."
Tanir took a deep breath. "But I'll do it. Not because I want to, not because... but because someone has to. And apparently my great-great-great-grandmother's questionable life choices made me that someone."
The old king laughed again, but this time it was warm, appreciative. "You know what? That reluctance, that awareness of the burden, that sense of duty despite the personal preference, that tells me that you are exactly the right man for the job."
There was that word again. Man rather than zihal. The human term that should have felt foreign in his mouth, but somehow didn't. Maybe that was the point. Maybe being caught between worlds, being neither fully one thing nor the other, was exactly what their people needed. Maybe Grandma Tenoshi had known exactly what she was doing when she took that injured human to her bed. Or maybe she'd just been lonely, and he had a sweet tongue. And sometimes that was enough to change the course of history. "So," Tanir said, straightening his shoulders and trying to look more regal than he felt. "What happens now?"
"Tomorrow," the old king said, placing the crown on Tanir's head with surprising gentleness, "we introduce you to your new life. You'll need training in education and statecraft, certainly a whole new wardrobe and—"
"Can I at least go back and get my mop first?" Tanir interrupted. "It's a really good mop. It took me like months to get the handle worn down like just right."
The old king blinked, then burst out laughing. Yes, you can get your mop. In fact, I insist on it. Any king who values a good mop is exactly the kind of ruler that we need."
As they walked together toward the throne room's main entrance, Tanir wearing a crown that felt heavier than it looked, one last thought crossed his mind. He really hoped that part-human kings were permitted to curse during official meetings. His vocabulary wasn't going to change just because he wore a crown.